On this episode of the Cleveland Real Estate Investor Podcast, Mike Riley is joined by retail management consultant Bob Antall. They discuss how the industry has changed over time with influence of technology and how social distancing will impact the business overall. Stay tuned.
And I'm with Bob Antall, who's calling in from Pasadena. Bob, give us a little bit of your resume in the retail business.
All right, I'll give you the short version. My career started out in technology. I worked for IBM for 4 or 5 years, and I got hired by a retailer in Cleveland who no longer exists called Gray Drugstores. And I spent about 20 years working in the retail industry before I moved into consulting. And then I did about 24 years of consulting for large retailers, large chains. And the last 11 years was my own business. So I spent a lot of time with a lot of different retailers over the last 40 years or so.
Yeah, I remember when we first met, this probably in the 80s, one of your clients was Target. It was just coming into view.
Right. That was probably about 1994.
And you were real high on that company. You said, watch this company. That's a stock to buy. What did you see in Target that made you say that?
It was, they had a really good concept and they had an excellent management team. And one of the things they did very early on before many retailers is they embraced technology. Now, as we all know, technology has become an integral part of retailing today with e-commerce and, their point of sale terminals and all that sort of thing. But back in the 90s, the retailers were pretty much skeptical of what technology could do for them and really were lagging other industries in making that investment.
I remember reading about Sam Walton and Walmart, how they also embraced technology. They were putting dishes in their all their stores so they could speed up the transaction process for people using credit cards.
Right. They were also an early adopter. And they were getting so big that they had economies of scale. So it's easier when you're that size to make pretty good investments. And the one thing about the retail industry is that basically their needs, technology-wise, are the same, whether you're a multi-billion-dollar retailer or you're kind of a mom and pop. You pretty much need the same kinds of information to run your business.
Right. Now, let's fast forward to now. You're retired. If you were back in the game, what would you tell your clients in retail now? I know that's a kind of a wide-ranging question, but depending on the retailer.
Well, up until the pandemic hit, the entire trend was all about customer experience because there are so many retailers that offer very similar, if not identical products. The only way that you can really identify differentiate yourself is giving customers an excellent experience when they do business with you. And that experience needs to be consistent, whether they're doing shopping in your stores, electronic commerce, making a telephone call to order something, whatever. It has to be seamless to them. So if you're offering a product for $49.99 across the entire internet, you can't be charging $59.99 in your local store. I mean, it confuses the customer.
Plus,
so it's all about just delighting that customer.
Right, and then you got to compete against the 800-pound gorilla, which is Amazon. People get used to, more comfortable buying online. They got to ask themselves, is this customer experience really worth my time going out to the store?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very, very difficult thing for almost any retailer to compete with. But I'll give you a good example of how you can compete with that. I was buying a flat screen TV a couple of years ago, and I was looking at my options and, Best Buy and Amazon and whatever. And I was very tempted to go with Amazon because their price was the lowest. But I decided to use Best Buy, and lo and behold, TV that came was damaged. Now, if it was Amazon, it would have been a hassle to repackage it, whatever, get a authorization, return it, and a week later, get another TV back. But with Best Buy, I drove to my local store in 20 minutes, told them what the problem was. Even though I didn't buy it from that store, I bought it online. They replaced it, and I was out of the store in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, that's a great customer experience.
Right. And I also think if you're going to buy, a TV or a piece of clothing, it's hard to do it online. I mean, for me, I'd like to see that TV, like to see the quality of the picture, unless it's a commodity, like coffee or underwear. You bought it before, the vendor, or like I buy Echo shoes, and
Yep.
I've been buying those for 15 years. But I know the size, I know the style, and I'm going on my third, black loafers.
Yep, you're right.
Um,
But, people like Zappos have overcome that, because Zappos says you can have full return privileges. So people go buy, 3 or 4 different pairs of shoes and return the ones that don't fit or they don't like or whatever. And it's pretty easy to do. So those kinds of obstacles are becoming less and less anymore. But you're right. For the most part, you want to see it, you want to touch it, you want to try it on, whatever. And it's one of the advantages that a brick and mortar retailer has that an Amazon does not.
and Walmart is stocks doing very well during this crisis. Because unlike Amazon, they have the brick and mortar stores, and
Exactly.
I think it's people want to find a way to get out.
Yeah.
Highlight of the day is going to the grocery store. So, if you're safely attired, but
You're right. But there's another factor here, and that is when we enter into a recession, such as 2008, what happens is people trade down. So the stores that do well are stores like Family Dollar, Target, Walmart,
Costco,
TJ Maxx, those sort of things. So that's one of the things that's happening right now, is that people are saying money's tight.
Yeah, and I think you look at Neiman Marcus. That's going, I think, bankrupt or in discussion.
Yeah,
bankruptcy.
I think every single department store has a high risk of going out of business during this.
Yeah, and so in a way, this virus is like a forest fire. It's just burning up the deadwood. So these retail stores that were already struggling, this is the final nail in the coffin.
It is, and the department stores have been the anchors at malls, which draw people in. So all these malls that have been struggling, and that's the majority of them, also risk going out of business. I'd be surprised if we didn't see a mass amount of mall closures now.
Or reinventing the mall. And even, let's take, for example, Severance Center, which is one of the original malls that was built in Cleveland Heights, because this is the Cleveland Real Estate Investor Podcast. So let's move to Cleveland. Let's string these balls together. I think that Cleveland is going to come out of this in a very strong position by virtue of its healthcare facilities, its healthcare industry, and the way Mike DeWine, Republican governor of Ohio, has done navigating through this virus. It's a nice combination of neighborhoods, but they're not built on top of each other, like New York City, or Chicago. It's a little more spread out, but still very accessible. And how much the housing costs here in comparison to the coastal
Right.
states. I mean, just night and day. A house here that, we have a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house goes for, $200,000 in Cleveland in a nice neighborhood. In your area in Pasadena, it's like $1.5 million. I mean, it's no comparison. So Cleveland's coming out of this, and there's been a lot of stories prior to the virus of how these malls are now evolving, food court style. But even that's going to be in the next year a struggle because people are not going to. They want to maintain the social distance. What are some of the thought ideas you've heard from your people in the retail about how the way of these malls going? What's the future here besides just tear them down?
It's been a real problem because, as you know, many, many malls have closed over the last 10 to 15 years. And, many of them, like Randall Park Mall, just get torn down because, when you think about it, it's really hard to repurpose these things. It's very expensive and very risky to do that. So I'm sure that some of them will be. There's been talk about turning some into nursing homes or, assisted living, whatever.
Or maybe even warehouses for Amazon.
Possibly, although the configuration is pretty poor for a warehouse,
Yeah.
So the answer is, I don't know what's going to happen. I think a lot of them just will be torn down. But getting back to Cleveland for a minute, there's a couple other things Cleveland has going for it. Number one, diversity of industry now. Back in the day, Cleveland is so manufacturing oriented.
Right.
And when we hit some bad spots in the economy, like the 70s, it hurt Cleveland pretty badly. But speaking of manufacturing, I think one of the things that's going to come out of this pandemic aftermath is a return to manufacturing in the States. I think what we've seen is supply chains are too fragile right now. When you get into a difficult position like we're in right now, we're scrambling around the world to try to find parts for ventilators and to try to find appropriate medications to do this and to do that. So I think Cleveland's going to benefit from a resurgence in manufacturing. It's not going to get back to where it was. But I think we're going to.
Yeah, but Cleveland with its strong medical centers, industry, the clinic, UA, CASE, the biotech, the life sciences, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're going to see a lot more, like you say, specialized manufacturing returning to the States. I mean, there was a great story in the New York Times a week or so ago about how these whiz kids in New York City built a ventilator. A basic ventilator, not the high-end ICU ventilator, but a sort of a stopgap ventilator for $10,000 as opposed to $30,000. And they sent the blueprints around the world so that people could manufacture.
That's pretty cool. That really is.
And now they're talking about all this stuff being done with 3D printers, making masks.
Right.
Company Cleveland that Governor DeWine reached out again through his contacts with the clinic, and this company, I forget the name of it, is now using their 3D capabilities to make masks.
Speaking of masks, one of the trends that I'm starting to see is fashion masks.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, we're going to be wearing masks for a long time, and it's going to become a fashion item. I happened to see a guy the other day that wore one that looked sleek, like sort of a Batman kind of thing, and I said, wow, he's already into the fashion, and it's going to happen.
Well, with listeners out there, go to the internet, Google and search for Ben Affleck mask. I guess he made the grade.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, exactly.
One more thing about Cleveland. There's a lot of noise going on out there right now about how difficult it is to live in big cities like New York.
Right.
And, not only cost of housing, but the total cost of living and the commute time and all the other hassles you have in a big city.
And the airports, the clog.
All that. And there's a lot of people that are thinking, this may be the straw that breaks the camel's back on that. And young people especially, are going to say, is it really worth it? Could I have a better quality of life living in Cleveland?
Right.
Even though I might not make quite as much money, the money's going to go a lot further.
Yeah, you don't have to spend as you probably end up net positive.
Right.
So what you're making, and especially if you're working remotely in a job.
Right.
One of our tenants, one of our 6 or 7 tenants that came in from New York, I had a chance to talk with him last night. He's walking the dog, and he had a digital marketing business in New York, which he sold a year ago. And he was using that time, and this guy's probably in his mid 40s, early 40s. They've got 3 kids, young kids. And he was telling me that, he's doing consulting work from his house.
Right.
And he's, a lot of these people who end up in Cleveland staying for a while on a short-term basis may end up permanently moving here.
Right. Right.
So what's it like in the LA area? I mean, it's one thing to talk about New York, but you're in the Pasadena, LA area.
Yeah. The people here they started early, shelter in place, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. It's unbelievable how little traffic there is. I was out walking the dog at 7:30 this morning, and there's hardly any cars. There was hardly any people out there, which is unheard of. I live on a busy street, and it's usually very crowded. It's difficult to cross the street because it's so crowded.
Reminds you of
Anyway,
Cleveland, doesn't it? It reminds you of Cleveland, the lack of traffic.
Yeah, it sort of does. We came back from my son's house yesterday on the freeways, which is normally a nightmare, and it took 45 minutes instead of an hour and 15.
Yeah.
So it was great. It's really a whole different ballgame right now. But again, I think a lot of people are going to stay home now that they're accustomed to working at home. I think there's going to be a trend to do
a lot
that
less driving around, getting up and go, and
yeah.
Okay, let's take a break and talk very briefly about one of our sponsors, Team Mike with Century 21 Realty. I've worked with Mike Ferrante for over 10 years. He's smart and his team is energetic. Mike doesn't show a house, he sells a house with proactive 21st century marketing, such as 3D showings, which during this pandemic is becoming a real game changer in the real estate industry. So if you want to sell your house fast and at the right price, call Team Mike at Century 21 Realty. Okay, back to our show. So, what is it like living in the LA area compared to your time? You grew up in Cleveland. You lived in Baker.
We're in a small city, and there's about 200,000 people in Pasadena, and it's densely populated. A lot of vibrancy. It's kind of exciting. There's a lot of activity going on all the time, which we love. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but you got to get used to the noise. You got to get used to the hustle and bustle. And the other thing is we avoid going very far. I mean, we stay within a 10-mile radius most of the time, because once you get on a freeway, forget it. You could be stuck in traffic for hours,
Right.
trying to get from point A to point B. So you learn to time it, you don't go at 7 o'clock in the morning, you go at 11 o'clock, and I can do that because I'm retired, So, it's like any other big city. You take what's good and you put up with what's so bad,
Right. Now you had the experience of, you live in 2 pretty pricey areas, Pasadena and also in the Plymouth, Boston area.
Yeah.
And I remember when you came back from the Boston area, relocated, I think it was in the, 90s or 2000. And you lived
94 it was.
Yeah, you lived on Shaker Boulevard or South Woodland in a mansion.
Well, not quite.
Or, no,
it was a nice sized house.
It looks like a mansion to people who come from a 3-4 bedroom split level. No, brick mansion close to the golf course, right? So,
yeah.
But I mean, you still had money left over after you bought it from your sale in Boston. So anybody?
Well, I was actually I spent 4.5 years in New Jersey. So that move came from New Jersey to there. And I bought the house in Shaker for exactly half of what I sold my New Jersey house for.
Okay. So anybody looking to not only invest in Cleveland, but maybe move to Cleveland, I mean, you get a tremendous amount of house for half the price you're paying now.
Oh, yeah, or less,
Yeah.
or even less than half in many cases.
Well, let's get some final thoughts here in terms of retail. I know we've been touching a lot of different stuff, but back to retail. 40 years in the retail business, 40 plus. Again, I asked this question and I'll ask it again. What would you counsel if you had to go back, your clients now about what?
Yeah. Well, given where we are with this pandemic, job one is to survive. Okay. And in many cases, survival means filing Chapter 11. Remember, I dealt with large retail chains, and a lot of them have long-term leases. And in many cases, they have underperforming stores that they can't get out of. So it may be an opportunity to get out from underneath some of those leases to lower your cost so you can continue to operate in an environment that's going to be highly questionable.
Yeah.
We don't know as we come out of this how quickly people are going to be anxious to run back into stores again. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months or more, So you got to think survival first. Okay. Then you have to go back to what I talked about earlier, and that is all about customer experience. If somebody comes in, they've got to have a superior customer experience coming into that store. You really do have to treat the customer as he's a king and make sure that you satisfy every need. And we all know what that is. I mean, how many times do you go in a store and you're really disappointed because they were out of stock, or somebody didn't treat you well, or you got ignored, or you couldn't find a cashier in Macy's, right? That sort of thing. You can't do that anymore. It's just customers don't want to put up with it. They've got too many different choices.
Right.
So that would be my advice. And when I talk about survival, I really believe that there's going to be a lot of retailers that are not going to make it through this recession that's coming up.
Yeah. Well, it's a double-edged sword. It's not just the recession, but it's the virus.
Right. Well, they sort of go hand in hand. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you got a health issue now. And of course, people are going to get used to not shopping. I think it's almost become a habit, almost like a sugar habit that, like now, for example, if I'm doing a lot of cooking, I've always done a lot of cooking, but now I'm going to think twice. Do I want to jump out to the store and get this one ingredient?
Right.
Or do I source, just see what I have, or maybe I make that later. So there's a lot more intentionality to that grocery list I'm putting together. And I think what's going to carry out as we come out of this, we're going to be a lot more mindful of viruses in general, but especially this one, because it's not going away. And second, I think you're going to see a lot more emphasis on the life sciences. So people are going to be focused, instead of buying the latest fashion, fad, whatever, their shopping could be a lot more geared towards health.
Right.
Math.
I think we'll see that. But getting down to more basics, a lot of people have lost their job, have lost their business, and they won't have the money to spend, and we talked about trading down. They're going to be looking for the basics at the cheapest price they can find them. And even people that do have the money are going to be conservative because they're going to worry, is my job going to be next,
Right.
So they're not going to spend the way they did before. And think about things like cruise ships. Who's going to go on a cruise? anytime in the next year, right?
Oh, 2 years easily.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, or even airlines.
Right.
I mean, the days of them packing us in to these planes, gradually getting less and less knee room, those days are over. I mean,
Yeah.
I can see, airlines coming back at half the size, so you can maintain
Sure.
the social distance. So,
Sure.
the irony of it is airline travel is going to radically change like restaurants and retail and
Right.
hotels. I mean, that
Right.
everything is getting blown up, and the cards are getting reshuffled. You're going to get airlines, wider seats. Anybody that's traveling is traveling for a reason. Going out to restaurants, you're probably going to see a 50% reduction in restaurants coming out of this.
Right. Right. Well, I think about my own situation. We had 2 vacations planned this year, one to Montreal and one to Europe. And I don't think we're going to do either one, because I don't want to be in any crowded situations. I don't want to be in hotels. I don't want to be in restaurants. And Montreal, we go for the jazz festival, and that's people wall to wall right next to one another.
Right.
So forget that idea.
Like Mardi Gras.
Yeah. So all those dollars just aren't going to be spent, and it's going to be a while before people feel comfortable, going
Right.
back to the spending patterns that they had before.
Yeah, and a lot more purchases online. You get. Are you familiar with the what's going on with 5G? And any thoughts?
Right.
Any thoughts on that? Obviously, that's going to change retail. You're going to have the ability to do a lot more virtual shopping.
Yeah. I really haven't thought a lot about how that impacts retail. The 5G is always sort of hanging out there. It's going to be here in a few months, and it never quite makes it. Hopefully, it'll be soon. But I just don't know the answer to that one.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Bob. Well, let's call it a day. You got to
Okay.
wash your hands now and go. And you're on your way to hiking in the mountains?
Yeah, we're going to go in the mountains where there's still snow and cool off because it's about 90 degrees here today.
All right. Well, I don't want to hold you up. Okay,
All
Bob,
right.
thanks for your time. We'll
Thanks,
talk
Mike.
later.
Thank you for listening to the Cleveland Real Estate Investor Podcast. Find old and new episodes on your favorite streaming services like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, or go to our website, www.riley-properties.com.